Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March 27th of 2023 State Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel, live from the Great Hall in Plymouth Town Hall. We're going to go right into the agenda. First thing is a roll call. We'll start with Mr. Noyes to my right, and we'll move to the left.
Dave Noyes, Compliance Manager of Holtec.
John Moylan, Holtec, Site Vice President.
Mike Fortini, appointed by the Senate Minority Leader.
Jim Lampert, appointed by the Speaker of the House.
Pine Dubois, reappointed by the Speaker of the House.
Back to Mary. Mary, for good measure.
Certainly. Got it. Mary Gaslick, appointed by the Minority Leader.
John Mahoney, Plymouth Select Board.
Andrew Gottlieb, appointed by Governor Baker.
Mary Lampert, appointed by Senate President.
Jack Priest, Radiation Control Director. I'm appointed by Margaret Cook, the Commissioner for the Massachusetts Department of Public Health.
Seth Pickering from the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. I'm appointed by the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs.
Henrietta Cosentino, appointed by the Plymouth Select Board.
Kelly O'Brien, appointed by UWA Local 369.
Jonathan Goldberg, Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities.
Bob Hayden, Department of Public Utilities.
Welcome, Jonathan. So a little explanation, Bob. So you're going to be moving along?
Yes, thank you. So I've been on the panel for a few years as a Commissioner of the Department of Public Utilities. My term ended in January. I'm technically in holdover status, and I've been informed that my last day will be April 7th, so I will no longer have the opportunity to serve on this panel. Jonathan Goldberg is our General Counsel. He is the vital for the DPU. We do a lot of complicated things at the DPU, a lot of different divisions. Jonathan is, I would have to say, the number one person. He is the anchor of the DPU. He lives in Plymouth. He's going to be a great addition to this group. I'd also just take a quick second, if I could, just to say thank you to the panel. Thank you to the folks involved in this. I live about 10 minutes away. It's been an honor. It's been a privilege. What we do here is really important. I think it's a very diverse group, a lot of diversity of thought. Nothing gets through here easy, which is a good thing. My wife and 3 kids live 10 minutes away, so I'll be gone from the panel, but I'll be watching from afar, and thank you. It's been an honor.
Bob, thank you, and Jonathan, welcome. I think we only had one member zooming in tonight, Mr. Viveros.
Yep, John Viveros, Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency representative.
Thank you, John. Anyone else? Fine. He's not on the panel. Okay. Okay, moving on to the next agenda item, previous minutes from the review and approval from the prior meeting. I did see an email from Ms. Constantino. You had one small recommendation for a correction. Any other concerns with respect to the meetings from the minutes from the January meeting? Is there a motion to approve the minutes? I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes from the January meeting?
And ask John, ask.
And it looks like unanimous
Ask
in the
John.
Great Hall. John Viveros, are you in the affirmative?
Yep, approved.
Approved, okay. It looks like it's unanimous, thank you. Okay, moving along. Next thing on the agenda is our legislative update for not only our state delegation, but from federal representatives. But we'll move right on to Rep. Muratori, Lenatra, and Senator Moran from over the bridge. Matthew, take it away. I'm sorry.
Should have started with Mark.
You have to go in the right political order.
So,
That was just a test for Matt. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Welcome, Jonathan. Nice to see you. I'm going to give a bit of a longer report because I gave such a short one last time. Once again, I thank the advisory panel for the chance to address the members. Since the last public meeting, we've continued our efforts to take concrete legislative action to hold Holtec accountable and ensure that not a single drop of radioactive spent fuel pool water is discharged into our bay. While my colleagues and I continue to push for legislative action, we also continue to face opposition. We pushed to get the special commission language originally agreed upon in the ECHO Dev bill last year, included in the fiscal year 23 supplemental budget. This language was included in the Senate's version of the bill, but did not make it into the House version. Rather than including weaker language, which would have changed the scope of the commission, we decided to regroup and push for more concrete language in future legislative vehicles, including the standalone bill that I filed with Representatives Cutler and Sarah Peak. We've also enlisted the help of environmental advocates such as the Conservation Law Foundation to ensure that the language is as strong as possible, ensuring transparency as we move through the decommissioning process. While we continue to face obstacles in our pursuit of full transparency, we have been able to gain some ground in commitments from Holtec. Members of the legislative delegation and I toured the power plant earlier this month. We pressed Holtec about their plans for the facility and learned that the company plans to complete deconstruction of the plant within 8 years. 70% of the outer infrastructure has already been demolished. Still to be dealt with, of course, are the 62 casks of spent fuel from the reactor and the accompanying radioactive pool water. The situation is urgent, and we continue to push for swift action. Holtec has also agreed to pursue a modification to their National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System and Surface Water Discharge Permit that would more accurately characterize the content of the wastewater. This is to be submitted by the end of March, and I look forward to reviewing this modification to ensure that it is consistent with the goals of our region. Additionally, Holtec has agreed to provide information on their on-site water inventories to an independent expert secured by Senator Markey, including notes on sampling techniques and split sample data. As we have noted in previous meetings, we've also secured a commitment from Holtec to have a member of DEP and from the town of Plymouth present during sampling. The state must fulfill its regulatory duty and take decisive action to ensure that the environment and economy of Massachusetts is not severely damaged for generations because we didn't take the time to investigate potential consequences. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Okay. So I can see.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having us back. As you recall, I'm sorry, Rep. Lenatra, Matt Muratori. As you recall, we were here back in January and on some discussions that we've had in the fall about proposing some legislation to create a more effective citizen advisory panel. Since that time, we've been able to meet with a couple of different groups. The Save Our Bay group we were able to meet with, Citizens for a Better Plymouth, and 3 other residents in the community that had some input to this. So as I said before, this is proposed legislation. What was submitted back in January is the discussion part of this to really start the process going. So we've agreed to work with Save Our Bay. We did get a draft over the weekend, so we thank you for that draft that we got. We'll be meeting with them on Wednesday to review the proposal and see what we can come up with to actually try to get legislation that can pass. And that's the key and the goal to this whole thing. Because as we know, over the last several years, there's our colleagues that we have to convince, and our colleagues on various committees and panels that we have to convince to try to get legislation passed. So we'll be talking with some of them to see what makes sense that we can get moved forward. I do want to say that a lot of the misconception that came out of the January meeting was that we were proposing to reduce the panel. That wasn't the point of it. If I wasn't clear, let me be clear now. The point of it is to try to start the discussion of how we can make this panel more effective. And it's not because of anything anybody on this panel has done. It's because this is the way it was set up by the previous administration. So we want to be able to make it more effective by having voting members from the state, by having some resources in here, and by including some more members of the town of Plymouth as well. But we all agree on the goals, the security, the wastewater, not discharging into the bay. We all agree on those, but we just need to make this more effective of a panel, and we're trying to work with that. So we'll be coming back hopefully the next time with some agreed upon language. And I think at this point, we're probably thinking that we may refile something instead of going with the one that was filed back in January. It'd make more sense than try to amend it. So I think that's our thinking at this point.
I look forward to talking to you, Matt.
Great. Any questions?
Any questions for Rep. Muratori and Lenatra? And by extension, Senator Moran? Go ahead, ma'am.
You mentioned getting other representatives from the town of Plymouth involved. What about the towns of Wellfleet and Brewster and Provincetown?
Yeah, yes. Yep. The way
Thank you.
The way the proposal came out from Save Our Bay, it's pretty much putting back the citizens here. Again, it wasn't about pulling them out. So it's about getting the citizens back in. So that's what we're working on now. Those groups, the Cape Cod, South Shore, Duxbury area, et cetera. That wasn't the point of this legislation. And that's what we're trying to make very clear. We're trying to make this more effective, not ineffective.
Thank you, Matthew and Kathy and Susan. And we're going to go into the federal delegation next, but you hang out for a few minutes in case there's any more questions?
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you. Jim Cantwell?
And as Jim walks up, I'm just going to say that we have worked together to make sure that this is a much broader reaching effort at outreach and information. Working with Representative Peake, Senator Julian Sear, and across Plymouth and further. It's a much broader reach, and you can just tell by looking around the room and by the appointments that have been made recently. So thank you for the question.
Before Mr. Cantwell takes the mic, I just wanted to let everyone know that we have another panel member who's zooming in, and that is Mr. David Nichols. Dave, thanks for joining us. Jim, the microphone is all yours.
John, thanks so very much. Mr. Chairman, members of NDCAP, members of the legislature here tonight, and all of our citizens with your input. Good evening. My name is Jim Cantwell. I'm a former state representative, live 10 miles from here. And I have the extreme pleasure to be the state director for Senator Ed Markey. I'm joined tonight by two of my colleagues, Ben Thomas and Katie Moorfill, who are in the back, as well as I'm glad to be joined at this very important meeting by our very close friends and partners, Mike Jackman, who is the district director for Congressman Bill Keating, and Caleb White, who works for Senator Elizabeth Warren. I'll be delivering a statement on behalf of Senator Markey to overview numerous steps that we've been taking over the last year. Here's the statement. Thank you to the members of the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel for your ongoing work to advise the governor, the Massachusetts legislature, the agencies of the Commonwealth, and the public on the decommissioning of the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station. You serve as a critical conduit for information sharing between stakeholders and the public on the decommissioning process. The residents of the Commonwealth are grateful for each of you as you play a critical role for our communities who have long lived in the shadow of the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant. Like myself, the senator says, Senator Warren and Congressman Keating, NDCAP has heard repeated significant concerns about the potential discharge of 1 million gallons of radioactive effluent originating from Pilgrim spent nuclear fuel pools and reactor cavity into our Cape Cod Bay. From Situate Harbor to the tip of Provincetown and beyond, school children, fishermen, business leaders, residents, state and local officials have expressed deep concerns about the potential impacts that this proposed discharge may have on human life, on marine life, and the economic life of our entire region, particularly on key economic engines like fishing, tourism, and real estate. In response to the community's grave concerns, in May of 2022, Senator Markey organized and chaired a hearing of the United States Senate Environment and Public Works Subcommittee on Clean Air, Climate, and Nuclear Safety, right here. First hearing of a United States Senate committee in the history of we knew was right here, and many of you all were there and present. At that hearing, we had Congressman Keating as present, and Senator Warren had questions that were presented as well. During this field hearing, we secured a commitment from Holtec's president and CEO, Dr. Chris Singh, to bring independent experts to test and evaluate the water. Dr. Singh said that Holtec would, and I quote, wholeheartedly support an expert evaluation. Following that hearing, Dr. Singh again committed in writing to engage with third-party experts to evaluate the water. We know that anything other than a robust and independent study will neither meet Holtec's public commitment nor safety of the stakeholders who rely on Cape Cod Bay for their life and their livelihoods. We know that any study cannot be a rubber stamp for Holtec. So my office went to work, engaging with our federal partners, local stakeholders, and various state and national experts. We cannot agonize, we must organize. So first, in response to the great concerns about the economic impacts of a discharge, Senator Markey says, I have communicated with universities who have assembled potential approaches to economically analyze this issue, which I will pass along, Mr. Chairman, to you, to NDCAP, Save Our Bay Coalition, and the Plymouth Legislative Delegation for your consideration. Secondly, the Senator secured commitments from Holtec to, number one, allow staff from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health and DEP, Environmental Protection, to be present for the sampling of water volumes, and two, to conduct split sample testing through DPH's radiation control program and an independent laboratory appointed by the state DEP. The Senator says, I'm grateful to the agency staff, including Jack Priest and Seth Pickering and the Healy-Driscoll administration for this very close partnership. Third, the Senator indicates he engaged directly with the Environmental Protection Agency to ensure that the EPA was monitoring any potential discharge of regulated pollutants into Cape Cod Bay. And as Senator Warren, Congressman Keating, and Senator Marker urged months ago, Holtec committed to pursue the required modification of its National Pollutants Discharge Elimination System, NPDES permit, as directed by the EPA. This permit modification process requires, first, an EPA review of the non-radiological pollutants. Second, consultation by the EPA with the Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary. And third, a robust public engagement and comment process. Finally, to provide for a robust independent analysis of the laboratory results that assess the radiological makeup of the water volumes and associated radiological risks from a discharge or potential discharge, my office has engaged with stakeholders regarding the independent evaluation. In talking to experts with specialized expertise in marine radiochemistry, physical oceanography, health physics, and nuclear chemistry, it is clear that a study would require a comprehensive process, including representative sampling of baseline levels of radionuclides in Cape Cod Bay first, indicator marine species, and pre- and post-treatment radioactive wastewater. This study would also require valid and reliable testing of those samples that reach sufficiently low levels of detection of radionuclides, as well as scientific analysis of the laboratory results. Because we know that a vision without funding is an hallucination, Senator Markey says, I asked Holtec to commit to funding this promised evaluation. It is their facility, it is their discharge, and it is their responsibility. In November, the response from Holtec was that, I quote, no budget is available to fund this effort within the constraints of the decommissioning finance regulations. While this directly, Mr. Chairman, as you know, this directly belied by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, who advised our office, and I quote, the NRC generally recognizes effluent sampling and analysis to be activities consistent with the regulatory definition of decommissioning in 10 CFR 50.2. The Senator notes, at the end of 2021, Holtec had $881 million in the Decommissioning Trust Fund. According to the company's own reports, it estimates that it will have $252 million in the fund by the time decommissioning is completed. money that it wishes to take home as a profit. The senator indicates that there is the need to make sure that this fund is used to make sure that everyone here is kept safe. For decades, ratepayers paid into Pilgrim's Decommissioning Trust Fund to support the decommissioning process. And now our ratepayers are demanding independent answers about the risks from a potentially large discharge of radioactive wastewater into Cape Cod Bay. Holtec's refusal to fund this robust independent study would violate its commitment to an independent review of any potential waste discharge into Cape Cod Bay, and most importantly, it would violate the public trust. So last week, the senator notes he sent a letter to President of Holtec International, Dr. Chris Singh, and the President of Holtec Decommissioning International, Kelly Trice, to urge Holtec to confirm its commitment to finance an independent study. We did get a response Friday that there will be a formal response coming in the near future. The senator ends by saying, I will continue working alongside local and state leaders and community advocates to hold Holtec accountable to its promises to the people and the planet. The senator ends, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all again for bringing us together for this very important conversation. Signed, Senator Edward Markey. Thank you.
Jim, take a question from the vice chair.
Of course, please.
Thanks a lot for getting back to us on that, Jim, and thank the senator too. I'd like a couple of clarifying, answers if I can.
Sure.
One, is there an estimate for the study?
There is not. There has been a great deal of back and forth with Holtec. What we would be looking for is the independent analysis and the PhDs and others that we've spoken to. They have given a scope of what would be done. We've been discussing with Holtec what that scope should entail. But quite honestly, we are less concerned about the cost than we are to make sure it's independent and it's thorough.
Well, I agree with you, but I was just wondering if there was an argument about cost. So my question is this. Why aren't we funding that on the state or federal level? And then if Holtec does have this enormous surplus of dollars when they decommission, to have them pay that back, rather than have an appearance that nobody's going to believe the study because Holtec funded it.
Part of that question can be perhaps answered by others, but I would indicate we have already paid for it.
Excuse me?
The ratepayers have already paid for it. Ratepayers have given over $1 billion to Holtec.
Well,
but I hear you, but your question, I understand, is you're looking for some kind of independent. And what we have found is the funds, in our view, the funds would go to either the state DEP or others who would be the ones who would take the funds and then would hire the independent experts so that people would see the money would go to the Commonwealth, not to NDCAP, not to Senator Markey and the like, but the funds are there.
Well, I think I disagree with the perception. And I disagree because A, we haven't finished dealing with the decommissioning yet. There's 62 canisters on the Hill that, might be moved by 2062 and then again might be moved in 1 million years.
Right.
So there's a big unknown, and I think Holtec is taking the risk. And where I differ with you and probably some of my peers here is that although we did pay into that, we also got all the benefit of the energy that was produced that had nothing to do with Holtec. These guys came in to clean up the dump kind of thing. They didn't make the dump, we did.
Yeah, but
you know what I mean? We did. And so and the other thing is we stopped paying at a certain point because somebody decided there was enough money in the trust fund. So we did get off pretty easy, in my opinion, until we know that there's this giant surplus of cash at the end and that we should claim some of that back. I'm just saying that our obligation, if we really want to take care of the generations to come, is to really make sure it's cleaned up, not to fight over who's going to pay for it.
And I think it's a fair question, Madam Vice Chairman, about the funds. And I'm just citing from their own analysis. So you're worried about Holtec having some cost overrun? I think but from their own analysis.
I like Holtec, the guys that are working there, but I'm not worried about them having a cost overrun. I know that I'm over my head in terms of figuring out how much it's going to cost. And I know I'm not there 24/7, so I don't really get it. I've been there enough to know it is expensive to do the work that they're doing.
Sure.
And
So-
it is expensive to try to do this study to the detail that we all want to see it. And I think we all want to see that, including Holtec would benefit, but I don't see why we're going to delay it because we have to fight with them.
Wow, and my final point, Mr. Chairman, through you, is an answer. So we do know, I don't think that the fight doesn't have to be there as far as funding. If we're going to be asking the state legislature for funds or the federal legislature, that would take a lot of time, right? And what we're looking for is to have a process that starts soon. We had a commitment, Madam Vice Chairman, a commitment from the president of Holtec, who was at this very building, who said that he would be supporting an independent study. We're holding him to that commitment. So that was, I know you may not have been, I don't know if you were at the hearing, but he committed at the hearing. And we know right now by their own estimates, in fact, we know right now that they have, and you have this data as well through NDCAP from all your great work, we know that they have $881 million at the end of 2021, right? And we know that they estimate their own estimates, not me, this is what they provided to the NRC. They're estimating they'll have $252 million in the fund when they complete decommissioning. So that's where the fund should come from.
John?
Mary?
Yes, and I would say, number one, from Holtec's point of view, if they do not satisfy the commitment made to Senator Markey, how can there be confidence by the public that they will be held to any of their promises to us, number one? Number two, when Pine Dubois, the vice chair, said, what about the spent fuel costs? We want to assure we have money for that. Clearly, that is true. However, that money for spent fuel management costs is reimbursed by the federal government, DOE, for not satisfying its agreement to take the waste in 1998. So in fact, Holtec is going to make out like a bandit with that money because they estimated the cost for spent fuel management will be about $500 million. They will get the reimbursement and can pocket that money. So add 500 million to the estimated leftover, and you get a very, I think, generous profit.
Jim?
Just one question. Jimmy, I noticed you quote that basically you were told that there's no budget available. I also understand from Senator Markey's letter to Holtec that the NRC has made very clear that they can use monies in the decommissioning trust fund.
That's correct.
To pay for what you propose. Am I right so far?
You're exactly right.
The concern that raises with me, and particularly this no budget available, and this is probably better a question for Mr. Moylan, is Holtec concerned that there really isn't enough money in the DTF? Because if there's no budget available, what does that mean if they know they can use the DTF? John?
You good? Yep. Any more questions for Mr. Cantwell?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
No problem. I'd like to turn the show over to Mr. Jackman. Mike, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything. You have any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No comments really at this time. Just really appreciate the work working with the rest of the delegation, Senator Warren and Senator Markey's office, and great to hear this update on their progress, and looking forward to hearing more from the panel tonight. So thank you.
All right, I see a rep on the screen underneath, I think from Senator Warren's office. Is that Caleb?
Yep. Yes. Thank you, Chair. No updates as well. Just kind of doubling down on everything that Jim and Team Markey had just said. Thank you again to everybody tonight, and looking forward to the rest of the updates. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for federal delegation for coming in. Jim, you're always welcome, obviously. I think this is the first time you've been into a meeting physically, correct? You've always Zoomed in before?
No.
Oh, you've been here before? I'm sorry. Forgive me. We see Matt all the time. But anyhow, so the state delegation, thank you. Senator Moran and Reps Lenatra and Muratori, thank you very much. Okay, moving on. We'll turn this over to Mr. Dave Noyes for the Holtec Pilgrim decommissioning update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for our update, we'll review the our waterfall chart. It gives the 6 major flow paths for activities associated with decommissioning, consistent with our previous presentations. The first one is for site characterization. That continues with development of the license termination planning. So that will be the initial Rev 0 license termination plan. So we can continue with chapters associated with that work. For the ISFAC, the dry cask storage, continue as custodians for the 62 canisters of dry cask and 3 canisters of greater than Class C waste. So we can continue to maintain and provide security for those pending the final and whatever is the ultimate safe removal of that material. For reactor segmentation, for dismantlement activities, and for our waste management, those all have separate presentations as part of this slide presentation, so I'll skip over those for now. And with respect to final site restoration, that will commence after the characterization of the on-site material. So for an update on demolition, 70% of the buildings above grade have been removed from site. So those are all the ones that are in red on the attached map. The one undergoing active demolition was the old secondary alarm point, which was a site access building that's in the middle left-hand portion of the map. Green are scheduled for demo, and those are scheduled for the continuing on in the first quarter, second quarter, and early third quarter of this year. That involves 2 underground storage tanks, 4 above-ground storage tanks, and 4 remaining structures, which I'll cover on an upcoming slide. Those to remain for the foreseeable future would be the lower portions of the plant intake structure and the plant's administration building, which right now provides the computer and infrastructure for support for decommissioning activities.
So, Dave, so it's safe to say that the green all be gone by the end of the calendar year?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Right, and then the 2 orange colored are the main process buildings. They're the reactor building, turbine building, and augmented off-gas building. Those will be removed in the 2025 to 2027 timeframe. So an update since the last meeting on demolition. The trash compaction facility which was a radiological shipping and receiving building on the eastern side of the plant, has been removed, and the cleanup is complete down to the foundation pad. Of the material removed associated with the trash compaction facility, about 14,000 cubic feet was removed and disposed of as non-radiological waste material. 22,000 cubic feet was recycled, so approximately 54% of the material associated with the building structure and its contents were effectively recycled, and approximately 5,000 cubic feet of radioactive waste material was removed from the site and sent to disposal in Texas. Yes, that's all been done this year. So upcoming for demolition activities, the Old Main Gate is the top picture. We have completed some minor asbestos abatement inside of that building under review of the Mass DEP, and have commenced demolition. In the lower left-hand corner of the picture, you see the removal of the bullet-resistant enclosure, which was perched on top of that building and has been removed as part of the demolition effort. And this week we move into active demolition of the building itself. Also, demolition has commenced on a wall adjacent to the trash compaction facility. So for a period of time, radiological material was staged and on-site storage containers were held within that storage location adjacent to the trash compaction facility. Those containers have been moved and we've commenced dismantling that wall structure. With respect to reactor segmentation, we continue with the work on removing reactor vessel internals. The control rod blade inventory have been all removed, as have the fuel support castings, control rod guide tubes. Upcoming in 2023 for the second quarter and beginning of the third quarter will be the removal of the lower core plate and the core shroud. Once that work is complete and the jet pumps have been removed, then we will be in a position to no longer require the water that currently exists within the dryer separator pit and reactor cavity, and that water will be available to drain to the torus.
When is that, Dave? When is that?
That'll be early in the third quarter of this year. For waste management activities, so we have continued to remove waste as quickly as it's generated at the site. So any Class A waste is being removed from site as it's generated. So in 2023 through March 15th, we've shipped over 31,000 cubic feet of waste material, of radioactive waste material for disposal. The B and C class waste is currently being staged on site, pending the approval of a cast design that will allow shipment of that material for disposal in the WCS facility in Texas. For highlight for regulatory affairs, the decommissioning funding annual report submittal is due on March 31st. That's in final internal review now, and that'll be public and submitted by the end of this week. And also the permit modification for the NEPDES permit and the state surface water discharge will be submitted by the end of this week as well. The submission will be a public document. For water management, we continue to discuss the timing for split sampling with Mass DEP, MDPH of the on-site water volumes for the cavity dryer separator pit, spent fuel pool, and the Taurus, which is scheduled to occur in April. And the town of Plymouth representatives have been invited to observe that as well. With respect to the letter that was received from the senator's office, the individual that was the addressee for that letter was out of office last week. We are working on the response, and I expect that to be issued by the end of this week. That's my report, pending any questions.
Dave, Andrew has a couple of questions, but I do want to say that it was important to the Plymouth Select Board, and it was important to the town manager of Plymouth that town staff was able to participate in the sampling, and I just wanted to thank Holtec for allowing that to happen. I know that I believe you've communicated with a department head of ours, and he'll be able to go down there and stand by and witness as whenever this process occurs. So thank you.
Yes.
Andrew.
Yeah, Dave, thanks. So if the I'm a little unclear on the timeline here. So if the permit application is going in the end of the week and the water sampling characterization is not being drawn until sometime in April, on what basis does the application rely to characterize the quality of the water you're proposing to discharge?
The basis is our sampling as the individuals that are requesting the permit modification. So the results will be corroborated with the state split sampling, but we're confident with the quality of the sampling in order to be able to make that submission.
So does the fact that you've already characterized it privately impact your intent or desire or willingness to have the independent sampling done as was allegedly promised back at the Senate hearing?
No, we've committed to that. We will continue to do that.
So I just wonder from a process point of view, since we don't know when that's going to happen and your application kicks off certain timelines, how does the public's ability to have confidence in the results comport with the timelines that are in the permitting process? And are you committed to waiting for the determination prior to making a determination about whether you're going to discharge or not?
I can assure you that the sample results, the split sample reconciliation, will predate any decision on a permit by a long shot. So we will have plenty of time to be able to see the results of the split sampling and to corroborate the sample results that were used as part of the submission.
So then walk me through that timeline. If you're obviously aware of what your expectation is when federal and state agencies are going to act,
right?
And you're aware of
So
what your timeline is, walk me through that calendar.
So split sampling will happen in April. Split sample results will probably take 2 to 3 weeks. So within that time frame, we'll have a reconciliation on the split sampling and analysis of whether our characterization of the water was correct or not.
Okay. And from your perspective, that then is adequate to enable the agencies to move forward with the permitting determination?
Yes, it's going to take the permit writers at the EPA, I believe, some period of time to even draft a permit based on our contention of what the water contains.
Right, and it's your assertion then tonight that that contention will be matched by the split samples, and therefore they'd be at their liberty to go ahead and complete the permit process?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, it's no different than any other permittee that submits that information. Usually the permitting agency takes that information at face value. If we're going to go the extra step of being able to do the split samples, we'll have that data. The EPA and Mass DEP will have that data.
And so that then makes it all adequate to complete the record to allow the agencies to make a determination.
Yes.
Okay, so given that, where then does this broader study of the resource and the implications of the discharge on the resource fit into the permitting process if, as you just said, you're going to have a complete record that the agencies can act on? What's the point of the rest of the exercise?
My understanding is that the concern was for radiological impacts to the environment, which are separate from the EPA and Mass DEP permitting process.
So where does that, if it's not part of the permitting process and not part of the state's regulatory authority, at what point, given your assertion that the NRC has told you can go ahead and do it, what's the point of the exercise? I mean, where if it's irrelevant to the NPDES and discharge permit conversation, where does it happen? And why is it then not just some grand distraction from the point? I mean, what is the point then of doing that study if it's not going to be part of the permit determination?
I don't define what the permitting process is. That's not part of my purview. The state and the EPA do that.
And if you're told by either the state or the feds through the EPA that that analysis is relevant to making a determination about the outcome of the permit application before you,
right?
Will you abide by that?
Dr. Singh agreed during the public hearing that he would take the input of that expert panel.
And do what with it when? If you're getting the permit based on your analysis of the water quality, what's the point of the environmental impact analysis that you've been called out on by the senator's office? When if you say the relevance of radiological regulation comes under the NRC and that box has been checked, and you can convince EPA and the state that the permit water is as you characterize it, and you get the permit, that box has been checked. So what is the point of the rest of the exercise?
How long, you've been involved in this kind of thing for a long time. How long do you expect the permitting process to take?
It depends. If there's a complete record, it can take over a year. It could take 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
It could take 10 years. I believe you predecessors were operating on an expired permit for decades.
We were, and do you believe that we can't complete an independent review of the potential radiological impacts within that period of time?
Well, not if you're not willing to fund it, no.
If we're diligent about it?
Well, I haven't heard any diligence about it, but I guess I'm looking for, you're making a process argument to me, I'm making a process argument back to you. Where in the process does that become relevant? From your perspective?
It becomes relevant in Dr. Singh's commitment. That's the only place that it fits into the process.
Okay. So we have to rely on his word that he's gonna, if it comes out bad, what is he gonna do with
There's
it?
no regulatory statute behind it.
Right.
I can't point to a regulation and tell you that this is where it fits into it.
Right. So it's an empty exercise then.
It's something that Dr. Singh committed to.
He made an empty commitment because it's not relevant to the regulatory process.
He was requested to make that commitment, and he made it.
Okay, we'll see what the letter says on Friday.
To me, it is relevant because there was a settlement agreement whereby you agreed to abide by state regulations. There are state regulations that say no, and they do not differentiate between radiological and chemical metals. So therefore, we know you'll be releasing tritium and other radionuclides that we will find out from Senator Markey's work. So it's very relevant for the court battle that is inevitable.
Dave, anything else? You have anything else to add in your presentation?
No.
All right, one more question from Henrietta.
Going back
Come on.
to the minutes.
You don't even look this way. Of course I do.
The minutes of January mentioned that, well, it was a question to Seth. Would economic impact be included in the review, the EPA and Mass DEP review of any application for an amended permit. And Seth said, I believe, I don't know, but I will find out. So,
So I don't have an answer on that tonight. The application needs to come in. Gerard, we can provide some information on that when it's my turn to speak.
I don't see that as being was that a question to me?
well, no, it was really a question to Seth, but
Okay.
it's
Okay,
relevant
all right.
to
All right.
what you've said about.
Henrietta Pine has a couple of questions, I believe, of Dave.
Okay.
I think, Dave, would like to know, I would like a reconciliation, if you will, of your presentation tonight on the schedule with the ESA that was provided last February. If you can do that for our next meeting or something like that, to say if there's any changes relative to the decommissioning plan that's in the ESA.
I
the
can,
dates.
and I can update it with the March 31st submittal.
That would be, I would really appreciate that. And I also, would like to have maybe at the next meeting a discussion of, because then assuming that the request is in and there's some response from EPA on this is, 900 on our list of to-dos, how that will impact your schedule. That's what I would like to know at the next meeting, not tonight.
Okay, and that is actually determining how the potential for the permit is part of our evaluation on the schedule and cost.
All right, Dave, thank you. Moving on to the IWG activities, an update with Mr. Seth Pickering.
Mr. Chairman, members of the panel, I have update information and also some questions that have been received from members of the panel since the last meeting that I'll identify what the questions are and provide answers to the best of my ability. So the first item I have here is on water discharge, and this is a new item. So EOEA, Mass DEP, and the Attorney General's office participated in a meeting that was held with EPA and Holtec back on February 15th. The meeting was requested by Holtec to outline its proposed procedures for sampling and treatment, which Holtec intends to submit as part of its discharge permit application. Holtec has informed the department and EPA and the other IWG members that it anticipates submitting the permit applications on or before March 31st, which is this Friday. Another new item, Holtec, CZM, Coastal Zone Management, MEPA, the Attorney General's office, and EPA met for an initial pre-filing discussion on the permitting on March 21st regarding MEPA and Coastal Zone Management Consistency Review, which will be part of the requirements. If a discharge permit application is submitted to EPA and Mass DEP, the state will review the application in light of all applicable state laws and regulations. As previously reported, the application will require several state and federal permits and reviews, including a federal NPDES permit, a state surface water discharge permit, a Mass DEP water quality certification, federal consistency review by the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management, and potentially review under the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, or MEPA. As explained at the January 2023 NDCAP meeting, an anti-degradation review must also be conducted by Mass DEP. On an update, Mass DEP and the Department of Public Health have finalized a sampling protocol for a baseline assessment of the decommissioning water, which is the 1.1 million gallons of water that we've been talking about, as previously presented to the NDCAP. The sampling will occur at 3 different locations: the spent fuel pool, separated dryer pit, and the Taurus. And it'll be observed by state agencies, Mass DEP, Gerard Martin and I will be there, and the Department of Public Health, Jack Priest, will be there. We understand that from Holtec that a representative of the town of Plymouth will also be present. Split samples will be provided to the state for independent testing. As previously presented, due to contractual limitations with its existing laboratory, Mass DEP has identified an alternative laboratory that can test the samples. This is going to be gel labs, not Eurofin as previously reported, and just to make everyone aware, that is the same lab that Holtec uses. The samples will be separate. They will be split samples. The chain of custody for the samples being taken will be observed, and Mass DEP is the customer. So the work will be done for Mass DEP. As we were trying to contract with laboratories around the country, it was impossible to find another lab that would do not only the metal work, but the radiological work. And so we had to go with this laboratory. So, just want.
Seth?
Yep.
Curious, so curious, upon completion of the testing,
Yep.
the, what is the chain of command of the results?
The chain of custody?
Yes, of the results.
Do you want to answer that? What do we do with the results?
I guess who gets them first? Who looks at them? When does it?
We're their customer. The results will come to us first
Okay.
for our samples.
You guys sit around a table in Boston somewhere and look at the results? Or on your computer?
Yes.
Okay. And then who makes the call? So how does this, and then when does this trickle down to? I'm just curious how this works.
No, it's a good question.
Timeline.
So we'll have the results. Remember, this is not a compliance or regulatory requirement. This is a sharing of information.
Yeah, okay.
Right? That's been requested by the public and the panel. And so my understanding is that we would then compare the results with what the DPH and the Holtec numbers look like to make sure that they're consistent. And it'll be made public.
And you
So-
guys, Mr. Priest?
So there was a lot of consternation when we said we were going to use GEL Laboratories. So GEL is an independent business, independent laboratory. It's not affiliated with Holtec. It's used by companies across the United States. They're unique because they can handle and have a license to look at radiological materials as well as the pollutants that DEP identified and we communicated earlier, things like volatiles and other things. So I'll say it's a complex soup of materials, radiological and non-radiological. And they were the one lab that could meet the requirements to do that and also be an independent lab. It's a independent laboratory. Holtec uses it for their samples. Many companies use it for them, and we'll look at these results. These are not, as Seth said, these are not samples that are going to be part of the decision making in the permit. They're information samples, so we have a good idea of what's in those pools, what will we be looking at, and then that would be useful information when we initiate this independent review of what may be in that water. So it'll give us a relative scale of what might be in that water as the permit goes through the application review process. So we identified the lab, who's going to be there. We've got senior staff people, myself and Seth and Gerard, a representative from the town, to watch that sample be taken as agreed to when we looked at their process of how they were going to take the sample. So we can be assured that it's a, well-mixed representative of that location. Those will go into our containers. We label them. We create the bill of lading. The radiological samples will go to the Hinton State Laboratory in Jamaica Plain. My staff of radiochemists will do that analytical work. We're using an independent radioactive materials shipper to put together a bill of lading, make sure it's properly labeled, and then delivered to GEL Lab. When the analytical work is done, those reports will come back to Gerard, Seth, and myself. And then we'll have an opportunity to review that data and then figure out how do we communicate that back to the NDCAP.
So we've been trying to use different lab, which is part of the reason why it's taken so long for us to be able to get the sampling off the ground. And so this is where we are. This was the only lab we could find that could do the radiological work for the sampling and the analysis that we need. And so we're going to move forward with that. And so
Let me just add
thought
one.
it was better to let people know
Right.
about that now.
So that laboratory is an independent lab. They're required to do national independent testing, certification of their results, all of their analytical work that they do is, reviewed, tested, spiked samples. They're nationally accredited. This is not a lab that we Googled and went to find a lab and said, oh yeah, these guys can do that type of testing. So we have confidence in the results that we'll receive from Gel Laboratory.
Sure.
Question is, historically, who has the state used to test for radiological materials in a sample and for priority pollutants?
Yeah, so we don't usually test radioactive.
So-
That's why I put
No,
it
Right,
back
hold-
in.
hold
that
on.
would
So-
be DPH.
Right, so so before I joined state service, I worked for utilities. Utilities used Gel Laboratory and Teledyne, I think were the two most popular labs, nationally accredited laboratories for doing that type of analytical work. The state has the Hinton State Laboratory, which we are also accredited and go through a certification process to ensure the validity of our results for the radiological work.
And
When we
who's the
looked at like Eurofin and Teledyne, like one could not do a volatile, but they could do rad. The other one could do rad, but they couldn't do volatiles, or things like that. We were able to come to Gel that could do the array of sampling that we wanted to do. And they're required, because they're radiological samples, they're required to have a radiological materials license for the state that the lab is located in.
And for priority samples, who's DEP historically used?
What?
For priority pollutants, who's DEP typically used?
Priority pollutant sampling?
Testing, sampling.
The list that we're doing include priority pollutants and some other compounds.
Yeah, but who,
Yeah, but who would we
historically, who
normally
is
use?
DEP used to test for
We
those?
have a number of private labs that are
Contracted.
to us, but they're not licensed to handle radioactive.
So the problem is they're looking for a lab that can do both.
Yeah, that's the dilemma that we ran into. We couldn't find a lab that could do, the analysis on the metals and the other, typical priority pollutants and the rad.
That is accredited.
Yeah, just couldn't find them.
Okay.
You have more, Seth? You want to keep going?
I do have more.
Okay.
So, let's see, so the sampling's been scheduled as of tonight for April 5th. That's next week. A state contracted radioactive material shipper will take custody of the split Mass DEP samples and arrange for delivery to Gel Laboratories for the testing. The DPH samples will be analyzed at the Hinton State Laboratory, as Jack just indicated. Mass DEP plans to analyze the samples for a wide variety of non-radiological contaminants as presented at the last NDCAP. And once the sampling results are returned, which should be within a month or so of the sample collection, Mass DEP and DPH plan to make the results of the state's split samples publicly available. So we good on that for right now? All right, so the site assessment work plan that is still ongoing. So the AGO is currently reviewing the ESA and the radioactive waste management plan. An update, let's see, on on March 24th, Mass DEP met with Holtec to discuss response actions being conducted under the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, otherwise known as the MCP or Chapter 21E, for 2 release tracking numbers that were issued in 2022. One of those release tracking numbers is for PCBs that have been detected in soil piles in the PERA-3 era. Is that said para or? So there's that, and then Holtec is proposing to conduct a release abatement measure, otherwise known as a RAM, to remove and dispose of this soil. So that would be for the PCB contaminated soil. The EPA's Toxic Substances Control Act program, TSCA, will also have to approve the plan. And the other RTN is for benzo-A-pyrene detected above the groundwater category GW1 reportable concentration on the industrial parcel. I'm sorry? It's, the benzo-A-pyrene?
Oh, thank you.
Yep. It's above the GW1 reportable concentration. So as has been previously reported, Holtec has tier classified the project site due to the identification in notice of releases in 2021 of metals and PFAS to groundwater. This was assigned a parent release tracking number. Holtec moved to the comprehensive site assessment phase under the MCP and must take comprehensive response actions under the MCP until a permanent solution is achieved, which is defined by the Commonwealth Settlement Agreement with Holtec to meet a permanent solution with absolutely no conditions. The response actions related to the 2022 releases will be conducted as part of these comprehensive response actions for the entire property. And Holtec is preparing a comprehensive site-wide, non-radioactive oil and hazardous materials groundwater sampling plan for Mass DEP review. Phase 2 comprehensive site assessment, which documents the nature and extent of contamination and contains a risk characterization, is due to be submitted to the department by April 21st of 2024.
Seth, one question.
Yes, sir.
My understanding is that the site assessment plan that ERM submitted when, I think in February of 22, if I remember correctly, is still under review.
It is still under review.
Do we have any estimate as to when that review will be completed?
I do not.
Yeah, there still might be an estimate.
So we have some other cleanup issues. So the DEP's asbestos section continues to be actively engaged in overseeing the demolition activities that Dave showed on his presentation this evening that are continue to occur at the site. And DEP meets regularly with the company to manage the asbestos discovery, identification, and abatement and removal process. This came up at the last NDCAP as well. Holtec has requested that the facility be able to change its wastewater disposal system from an on-site wastewater treatment plant to a Title V system, which is essentially a septic type of system. Mass DEP is continuing to evaluate this request and will remain involved in any approvals needed. The amount of wastewater that's generated at the facility is much, much smaller than it used to be, and a Title V system is only allowed to handle sanitary waste in the future. That's the way things are transforming at the facility. On public safety, MEMA continues to work with the local partners on public safety planning and continues to work to schedule quarterly work group meetings with the former evacuation zone communities. So there were a number of different questions that came in to the department since the last meeting, so I will do my best to identify what those questions were. Mr. Lampert had most of them. We'll take a shot, and Jim, as you requested, we'll get you a written,
Great. So we don't have to transcribe
question
this.
and answer after the meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. So at the last meeting, you asked who the CZM individuals would be involved in the permitting process moving forward. And so Lisa Berry Engler, the CZM director, is going to be the point of contact. Let's see, on a second subject, a few days ago, the AGO told the UGM that Holtec will file its applications for amended permits this month, probably March 31st. That request is important to NDCAP. the Attorney General, number of state departments and the public. When will you send a copy of the application to the state and hopefully a copy of the application to EPA to all the NDCAP members? So this question would seem to be directed to Holtec, but we think it's reasonable to ask Holtec to share the applications with the NDCAP after they're submitted. But just know that once they're submitted to Mass DEP, certainly, the surface water discharge permit, it becomes a public record.
Yep, in
So
that
you can-
case,
you can always request it.
provide it to the panel?
So, yeah, we can talk about that. But I mean, the normal process would be that if the permittee didn't supply it, we'd have to go through the records request deal, which we can talk about that.
So you're going to force us to go through a formal, extended records request to send us
It's
a
not
copy of a
extended.
public document?
We have to turn those requests around within 10 days of receiving.
Yeah, it's not as complicated as that used to be.
It can
It's
be.
10 business days. And I promise you, Jim, that if you have to make that request, we will turn it around quicker than that.
Thank you.
I'll see you in Lakeville.
Pardon me?
I'll see you in Lakeville.
That would be nice. Let's see, several other questions related to Holtec's possible amended permits. Let's see. Okay, Jim, some of this just goes to, some of the reasons you were looking for an answer before May. So I'm gonna skip that. So, let's see, okay, so here are the questions. So George Papadopoulos of EPA told Jim that he will write any amended EPA permit. So here's question 1A. Who will write an amended state clean water permit? And that has not yet been determined.
Okay.
But I think you're familiar with who the NIPD's group is in Boston. What state agency and who at that agency has ultimate responsibility for an amended state discharge permit? That would be Mass DEP and the NIPD's program. If you have not already given us their contact information, please do so. So Leldon Langley in the Boston office is the DEP contact for the NIPD's program. But any member of the NDCAP should communicate through me, as I'm Mass DEP's NDCAP representative. Let's see, the next question went to the permitting process involving CZM and what role will it play? So Mass DEP has responsible for issuance of the water quality certification in coordination with EPA on the NIPD's permit and the issuance of the surface water discharge permit. CZM handles federal consistency review, and the MEPA office would oversee MEPA review if it is necessary, needed. So if it trips MEPA applicability, then there would be a MEPA review as well. Let's see. Ocean Sanctuaries Act question and other applicabilities. So the question is, what are the other applicabilities? Jim, you know how that works, right? So we will look at all applicable laws and we will consider them, by the state. If and when a permit application is filed, we know it's coming. To the extent legal interpretations are requested, though, this could, implicates privileged communications with the Attorney General. Do DPH, DEP, or CZM believe that deciding what state laws dealing with discharges of waste are important and relevant to granting a discharge permit? As it's a decision to make, the answer to that is affirmative, yes.
It's DEP's decision to make? The question was, is it DEP's decision to make?
So the NIPD's permit is EPA.
Yep.
The surface water discharge permit is DEP.
Okay. And CZM's role, did they make any final?
CZM is it's consistency, right?
Consistency.
Yep. CZM handles federal consistency.
Okay. Thank you.
Bear with me, I'm not a wet expert. Let's see.
You can skip 4.
Your next question was, are we aware of the governor's position? And yes, we are aware of the governor's public
Okay.
statements, absolutely. Jim, do you want me to read that into the record?
Everybody's seen it anyway, so you might as well.
Well, so Mr. Lampert was just, is DP, DPH, and CZM aware of the governor's position that she is damn sure, in whatever capacity I serve, that we're not going to have radioactive waste dumped down here?
And that's quoted.
Seth, was that when she was on the
So,
campaign
yes,
trail, or
we
was
are
that
aware of that,
when
Jim.
after she was
I'm
sworn
sorry,
in?
what?
Was that after she was sworn in as governor? Was that after she was sworn in as governor?
It wasn't my quote, so I don't know. Jim,
Gotcha.
can you shed some light on that?
That particular quotation was made, as you, not surprised, put it, quote, on the campaign trail, close quote. But I've had conversations, not with her, but with other people since, that would indicate. No, excuse me. You can listen to my complete answer.
rudeness.
Well, but maybe other people can't. But I've been told by others since that there's been no change in the position. Correct.
Okay, so let's see, the next is a little bit wordy. So the deregulation regulations require Holtec.
Degradation.
Degradation, that's what I thought. It says deregulations. but
Anti-degradation,
Jim,
my
yeah,
mistake.
Jim and I have an ongoing, we excuse each other's typos, right, Jim? So require Holtec to demonstrate that the discharge is necessary to accommodate important economic or social development in the area in which the waters are located, and that no less damaging alternative site for the activity, source for disposal, or method of elimination of the discharge is reasonably available or feasible. 310 CMR 4.04, parentheses 5, parentheses A. Holtec has said that it has at least 3 options: evaporation, shipment to existing low-level waste facility, or storing water on site, all which appear to be both feasible and available. So then there are a number of questions here. What is CZM, DEP's, or DPH's procedure for determining whether a discharge is necessary to accommodate important economic or social development? I'm mumbling? Wow, that's unusual. I'm not usually, chastised for that. I'm sorry? Oh. You want to come up and read this stuff? Come on up.
Let's, back on point. Here we go.
So, all right, well, I'm getting questions from the audience, Chairman.
Okay.
So, all right, well, so I'll slow down and we'll be here a little bit longer, which is fine with me. So, the question was, what is CZM's, DEP's, and/or DPH's procedure for determining whether a discharge is necessary to accommodate important economic or social development? What, if any, standards are there? That was A. B, what is CZM's, DEP's, and/or DPH's procedure for determining whether an alternative is reasonably available or feasible? What, if any, standards are there? As you know, Holtec has said it has at least 3 other NRC-approved options: evaporation, shipment to an existing low-level waste facility, and storing the water on site. C, if in enough detail so NDCAP can understand, what kind of evidence will CZM, DEP, and/or DPH require Holtec to provide if Holtec contends that its desired discharge will accommodate economic or social development, and/or that Holtec does not have any reasonably available and feasible alternatives? For example, what kind of evidence of supposed social or economic benefit, and what kind of evidence that Holtec's other NRC-approved alternatives might not be reasonable and feasible? D, will those responsible for deciding whether to issue an amended permit consider Holtec's likely profit and the fact that all of that profit will come from money that users, parentheses, not Holtec or any previous Pilgrim licensee, end parentheses, contributed to the Decommissioning Trust Fund? So here's the answer to that, Jim. Mass DEP will consider all applicable standards, including those set out in 314 CMR 4.04 parentheses 5. in conducting anti-degradation review. Without an actual application before Mass DEP cannot opine about the completeness of an application and its compliance with the applicable standards. But in general, Mass DEP expects applicant to submit the data, analysis, and the materials supporting that analysis necessary for Mass DEP to apply applicable regulatory standards to the proposed activity. 6, the State Clean Water Act defines a pollutant as, quotation marks, pollutant to be, quotation marks, any element or property of sewage, agricultural, industrial, or commercial waste, runoff, leachate, heated effluent, or other matter in whatever form and whether originating at a point or major non-point source, which is or may be discharged, drained, or otherwise introduced into any sewerage system, treatment works, or waters of the Commonwealth. Under 6A, nuclear power stations are not the only facilities that produce radioactive waste. In DEP and DPH's view, does the definition of pollutant definition in the Clean Water Act include radioactive waste other than waste from a nuclear power station? As we all know, there are many other entities that produce radioactive waste. 6B, has the state issued permits authorizing the discharge of water that contains radioactive materials, parentheses, other than such a discharge from a nuclear power station, end of parentheses? Do those permits authorize the discharge of radioactive materials? Do they address such a discharge at all? And 6C, does any state law or regulation require that a nuclear power station discharge permit not cover radioactive materials? So the department acknowledges that there are differences in the definition of pollutant under the federal and state Clean Water Acts. Mass DEP will be evaluating the regulations under the State Clean Water Act in reviewing the discharge permit application from Holtec, as well as any public comments that will be received. In response to the particular questions posed, Mass DEP is not aware of any Mass DEP permit that directly authorizes discharge of radioactive wastewater into a surface water body. We are aware that certain facilities, like hospitals and universities, discharge water that is allowed by their sewer use permits to a wastewater treatment facility operated by a municipality or MWRA. DPH also issues a radioactive materials license that could authorize the release of effluents, in parentheses, including liquid effluent, that meet regulatory standards. The department is not aware of any state law or regulation that requires exclusion of radioactive material. We note that the Massachusetts Water Quality Standards Regulation include a standard for radioactivity at 310 CMR 4.05, parentheses 5, parentheses D. The last question I have from you, Jim, is about the sampling procedure. So, I think we probably heard the full answer to that. Yeah, so, the facility provided us with a protocol. The spent fuel pool and the reactor separator dry pit samples will be taken from those vessels directly, and each sample pump discharge will provide the samples. We're familiar with where that's going to happen. And the torus samples will be taken at sample valves that are in the torus area that line up with piping and instrumentation diagrams that we've seen from the facility. So that's what I have for Mr. Lampert's questions. Mrs. Lampert, you asked about, could you please let us know what category of water Cape Cod Bay is labeled? And so we had a little sidebar about this earlier, but the answer is Cape Cod Bay is not listed in the Massachusetts Surface Water Quality Standards at 314 CMR 4.06, parentheses 6, parentheses B. And therefore, it's a Class SA water body and is presumed to have high-quality water pursuant to 314 CMR 4.06 parentheses 5. So it's SA. It means it's high-quality water, which goes to the way it will be looked at in the review. Correct, Gerard? And we got one more. I believe that this was from Diane Turco. Can the discharge permit allow a discharge if OHM is over reportable concentration established by the MCP? Is that your question? I think so. I'm pretty sure it came from you. So the answer to that, Diane, is that while there are some exceptions, generally speaking, Chapter 21E does not require the submission of a release notification form to Mass DEP for releases that are authorized by a water discharge permit. So I think that's it for Q&A for my stuff. Is there anything else?
Yeah, quick one. Hold on a
Go
second.
ahead, you go first.
This body next meets May 22nd, I believe, the fourth Monday of May, so the Monday before Memorial Day. What's the probability that the split sampling, the testing will be completed and out to the public prior to that meeting?
So we're hoping that we'll get the results within about 4 weeks after the sampling. So that's the beginning of May. So, we have the results. We'll turn them around as soon as we can.
Okay, all right, so thank you. Mary?
Steph, question for you.
Yep.
During your discussion and answering the questions, you mentioned something about municipalities, wastewater treatment plants, also potentially discharging radionuclides. Has the town of Plymouth's wastewater discharge ever been analyzed for that? Have you ever found it?
So I can't answer that because we don't regulate that at DEP. Is that?
That's a question for the environmental engineer for the town of Plymouth.
Okay, I will send that and ask that question. My next
Because
question.
it goes through the wastewater treatment plant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just curious as to whether or not they've ever had to test for
Gerard, you
radionuclides.
wanna?
No, I know that. I'm talking about, we talk in general, even though the majority of the town of Plymouth is not hooked to the wastewater treatment plant, their septic goes there. So if you have, I know that the hospitals are hooked to the wastewater plant, but you have the potential to have radionuclides into that waste stream. And I'm just curious whether or not it's ever been analyzed for those radionuclides. But I will reach out to the town environmental engineer and find out the case.
We can check on that, right? We can check on that as
Great.
well.
Great.
Sure.
Seth, I got one more quick one. The lab, and maybe to Jack, the lab conducting this. How many labs are capable of doing this testing across the country?
So
Can you count them on one hand?
For what we wanted, for the suite of pollutants and the radiological stuff, we could only find one.
So not in New England, not in the state.
Unless we went to Jack's lab.
A handful. Okay.
Yeah.
But
We-
a handful could do, a handful of labs that are,
Certified?
right, national voluntary.
Jack, is your mic?
I'm sorry. Good, better? Okay. So there's a handful of labs that have that NVLAP certification accreditation. That means they do blind spike testing. You get a sample of an unknown quantity from like the FDA. And it's got, I'll make a number up, right? It's got 10 microcuries of cesium in it. So you get your sample, a blind sample, you don't know what's in it. You analyze it, you send the results back to the FDA. FDA compares it to it's a test. Compares it to what the results are and says, yes, you came in at 9.995, sample spike was 10. You're good. You get your certification. The difficulty, as I said previously, was finding a laboratory that had a radioactive materials license that they could receive samples with radioactivity in it. That was criteria 1. So, okay, they have a license. Great. Do you do radiochemistry? Oh, we don't do radiochemistry. Well, cross that lab out. Find another lab, and they say, yes, we can do radiochemistry. Yes, I have a license. Great. Can you do volatiles and metals and the pollutants from the DEP? Now, we can only do 3 out of 5 of those, cross that lab out. Gel was the only lab that had all the check boxes that I have a license, I can do radiochemistry, I can do the pollutants that were identified by the DEP for this round of sampling. That's why we picked gel. There's some.
One more.
Okay.
One more for Mr. Pickering. Henrietta.
Yes, this is really not a question. It's a comment. Is that okay? I would like to make a comment.
Absolutely.
It is encouraging, I suppose, that the process includes anti-degradation, because the two requirements, as I understand it, of the anti-degradation process are, one, that the applicant must show that the release of these contaminants, even if they don't reach the bar, the EPA or DPH bar, they must show that this is necessary for economic reasons. And on its face, we know that not only can Holtec not show that it's necessary for economic development, but it is actually detrimental to economic development. So that's one. The second, the second anti-degradation requirement, as I understand it, is that the applicant must show there are no other available options. And we already know by Holtec's own admission that there are 3 other legal available options. So that's one thing. And it's good that there's such a process, but I still do not understand, I fail to understand why this is even necessary, since it is illegal according to the settlement agreement that was signed by Holtec. And it very much disturbs me that this process appears to take away the authority from the Attorney General and deliver it to the EPA and Mass DEP in the process. That does not seem right. That's my comment.
Okay, thank you. Seth, thank you. We'll move on to public comment. Yes, ma'am, with the glasses on. Come up to the microphone. Up to the microphone, introduce yourself and ask your question. She's a new face.
Pat Watson. Question on the lab. I understand that, it might not check all the boxes because it's got to be accredited, but is there not a university research lab that we could find that could do the same work?
Short answer was no.
Because it's not accredited?
So they have to be, one, we wanted to make sure that they're accredited. 2, they have to have a license to possess radioactive material because the samples are radioactive, right? It's reactor coolant water coming from the facility. And then the third part is, can they do the types of analytical tests that the DEP needed to identify pollutants?
I'm going to guess, maybe not accreditation, but I'm going to guess yes to most of those questions. I'm not doubting what you're saying, but I'm just saying that an example was in the East Palestine town in Ohio, the train disaster, and I don't want to, just the federal government, could be EP, I'm not sure which division, but they had said that they couldn't determine how much or they didn't have the facilities, they didn't have this, and a university says, we have the facilities.
Right.
So I'm just double checking to make sure there isn't another place, like a university that we know deal with radioactive. Yep. They do research all the time.
So we have some pretty hefty universities in Massachusetts.
Exactly.
And we solicited those questions to those universities as well.
And the answer was?
No.
They don't do.
They can't meet that matrix
of accreditation, I would say.
For those samples.
Even
right?
MIT, is that true of even MIT, which has its own nuclear reactor, as we know?
Correct.
Wow.
So It's a little complicated. I'm probably trying to oversimplify it here to explain it to people, not that I'm trying to talk down. So like MIT, yes, they have a radioactive material license. Yes, they have a reactor there. But the chemistry part of the laboratory may not have that radioactive materials license required to analyze those samples.
The license, correct?
Correct.
So that's, not to be, but I'm just saying, these are, it's not the ability, it's they technically don't have the license or technically don't have the license.
Right.
It's not they don't have the ability, they just don't,
They,
and that could
they don't
be-
have the pedigree to look at that sample. Pedigree meaning they don't
No,
have
I know
a,
what,
they don't have a
no, I know
license.
pedigree is, but we're
Yeah.
talking about research. I guess I don't want to argue with the point. The point is that if they had the license, if they had the accreditation, that there is a possibility. And I know it'd be hard, I know it'd be difficult, but I'm just saying that there
So-
could be they don't fit every
Right.
box that you have. I understand
That's
that.
correct. So I think, so there's a difference in this sampling that we're doing, right? So the sampling that we're doing now is a point on the map. This is not what the final water, this is their untreated raw water. We want a good idea of what's in that water now as that application comes in. This is not we've cleaned the water up, it's ready to go out if they ever get to that point. At that point, would be looking again, do we have the right lab? Do we need to have a double verification? Should we send 2 samples out to try to find another lab, or to help one of those other universities or one of these other labs to get the right accreditation so they could be approved to do that analytical work? For this sample, we did not do that. We picked a nationally accredited lab that we knew could do the sample analytical work and the chemistry work and have a rad materials license.
Thanks. And it's just that when you go to the doctors, it's always good to have a second opinion.
Absolutely.
And maybe the university research could be that little backup plan.
Art?
Thank you.
We got a lot of people in line, it believes, like in the queue for public comment. We have limited time, Art, so let's, everyone, let's try to keep this under 3 minutes.
I'll restrict it to the 3 minutes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Honorable committee members, good evening. Community members, thank you for participating, and thank you for staying for the public comment part of this meeting. My name is Art Disloges, and I am on the executive committee of the Massachusetts chapter of the Sierra Club, the oldest and largest grassroots organization dedicated to protecting our environment. I'm also a resident of Plymouth. Over the past year, there has been much concern on whether citizens like you and myself have a meaningful voice on this panel or this entire decommissioning process. We do not, and we must have one. To make that a reality, I have filed citizens legislation with the Senate of Massachusetts entitled An Act Strengthening Citizen Participation on the Panel for the Decommissioning of the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant. It is SD 2518. This is nonpartisan legislation. It is modeled after successful legislation in other states. There were 2 areas of change in this proposal. First, it reconstitutes the panel, guaranteeing a majority vote to citizens. The panel will consist of continued membership by the 6 state agencies currently represented, 4 citizens at large appointed by the Speaker of the House, President of the Senate, the Governor, and the Plymouth Select Board, a member from the Association to Protect Cape Cod, new citizen members from our elected officials who have championed transparency and justice in this process, including one appointment by Senator Markey and one from Senator Moran. As important, appointments, one each, from groups with decommitments to the town of Plymouth and the community, including the Plymouth League of Women Voters, the Plymouth Preservation Committee, the Plymouth Board of Health, and the Plymouth Herring Bay Wampanoag Tribe. The 2 members for Holtec will be non-voting. The second area of change will strengthen this NDCAP process. These measures include a minimum of 60 minutes at each meeting for public testimony. Holtec must respond to reasonable questions from the public. $35,000 for the chair to use in obtaining expert and non-biased testimony. And a requirement that the panel and governor meet at least once a year to discuss the concerns of citizens. There are also other measures, but in closing, this legislation will place citizen values and their aspirations at the center of this decommissioning process. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Please identify yourself.
My name is Brian Campbell, a retired electrical engineer, and I strongly support discharging the treated water with residual tritium from the shuttered Pilgrim nuclear station into Cape Cod Bay. This is the safest scenario, as reported back in September by Dr. James Conker. At any level outside the laboratory, either experimental or manufacturing, tritium is harmless. Every year, we release millions of gallons of slightly tritiated water into oceans, lakes, and rivers from almost every commercial nuclear reactor in the world, and have done so for decades, all in accordance with globally accepted nuclear safety standards, with no adverse effects on the environment or humans have ever been seen. The presentations by Holtec to this nuclear decommissioning citizens advisory panel shows Holtec to be a good corporate citizen, performing the Pilgrim decommissioning in a truthful and open manner that should be commended. Instead, our political establishment unfairly condemns Holtec, just as they drove Entergy to prematurely close Industrial Cathedral Pilgrim Nuclear in 2019. This increased Massachusetts emissions by 2 million tons per year, eliminated 62% of Massachusetts low-emission energy, and eliminated 600 mostly union jobs. This is the equivalent of burning 20 extra Boston landmark Carita / rainbow artwork LNG tanks per year. Energy in general illustrates the dual standard of hypocrisy that the Massachusetts political class, where is the Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel for Brayton Point Coal Power Station in Somerset, Massachusetts, and how is owner Commercial Development Incorporated allowed to lease space to a business hauling scrap metal to the site and using the pier to ship metal to Turkey. It is supposed to be for offshore wind development, but in 2021, Maura Healey is investigating. Massachusetts Clean Energy and Climate Plans for 2030 and 2050 goals state expensive, unreliable offshore wind will be the backbone of our future electrical grid. San Austin, Vice President of Offshore Projects for Commonwealth Wind, a parent company of Avigern, said in a statement that developer had filed notice with the Department of Public Utilities so that we can continue to engage in the ongoing discussion with all parties around the economic headwinds that we have changed the calculus of the proposed wind farm financing. Massachusetts taxpayers and ratepayers will be footing the bill for this renegotiation. Expensive, unreliable offshore wind projects will industrialize the summer feeding areas of the endangered right whale off the Outer Cape. Constructing as well, continuously operating large wind projects off New England's coast will affect right whale habitats and cause pollution and stress to whales and cause them to die off. According to a letter from our scientists sent to the Interior Department.
Brian, you're at 4 minutes.
Thank you.
What you good? Thank you. Okay, you're all done?
I can continue on with
No,
this
no.
statement. I would like to.
No, we're
If it's
running out of
okay.
time. If you could wrap it up in 10 seconds, please.
Okay. This was obtained by New Bedford Light and Massachusetts News Outlet in 2022. Biden administration is hiding this. 30 New Jersey coastal mayors are calling for a moratorium on offshore wind activity. More than a week after the 9th deceased whale washed up ashore on...
Brian, you're at 5 minutes now. Come on, we need to give somebody else time.
Coincidence? I wonder.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right, who's next, sir?
Good evening. My name is Ryan Collins, and I grew up in Sagamore Beach, which is located about 11 miles south of the nuclear power plant. Thank you for providing me with an opportunity to present, and I promise to make this short and sweet. 8 weeks ago, I started a petition on change.org asking Holtec CEO Krishna P. Singh to please retract his plan to dump 1.1 million gallons of radioactive water into Cape Cod Bay. My petition quickly gained tremendous support from thousands of people, yet despite the large public outcry, I am yet to hear from CEO Krishna. David and John, I'd like to emphasize that this petition has nothing to do with either of you. The way I see things, you are both doing your jobs to the best of your ability, and I appreciate the work you are doing. According to change.org, the number of people who have signed my petition is listed online at more than 200,000. I find this number truly shocking. And to be completely honest, I had my doubts as to whether all those 200,000 signatures were legitimate. And I feel a moral obligation to make that point known publicly here tonight. However, despite my skepticism, the team at change.org has assured me twice now that the signature count is a fair representation of real, living, breathing human beings. Tonight I have chosen to present to Holtec a portion of those signatures, as many as I could fit into this binder, which for the most part includes people who are local to this area. Many of these people have also posted heartfelt comments on the change.org online petition page, and I thank you all for your support. Since I have not yet heard from CEO Krishna, and because he is not present at tonight's meeting, I would like to do the next best thing and present this petition to you, David and John. I appreciate any assistance you are able to provide in getting this petition in front of your CEO. In closing, I'd like to mention that on the Holtec website, it is stated that Holtec is, and I quote, a learning organization, forever striving for a higher standard of excellence. CEO Krishna, if you happen to be listening, then I'd like you to know that I personally feel that right now is a wonderful opportunity for you to demonstrate this higher standard of excellence by acquiescing to our collective wishes as a community in agreeing to no longer consider dumping this water into our beloved Cape Cod Bay. Thank you.
We just, sir, I know you came down from Amesbury. Could we just get a couple of new faces a chance here, and then I'll call on you after them. Blue vest, the blue shirt, thank you.
Okay.
All right, sir. Sir in the red, you can go next in the red slip.
Sorry. Good evening, members of the panel. I'm Margaret Rankin. I own a bed and breakfast on Cape Cod. I had just one question for Mr. Noyes, and that is, as you have characterized the water at the plant, how much tritium does it contain?
I don't have those figures with me right now.
Do you think that it's relevant how much tritium the water contains in your plans to dump the water into the Cape Cod Bay? Will you take that into consideration before doing so?
Absolutely.
Okay. Do you know that at Fukushima, there are only 3 grams of tritium, 1 teaspoon? And they will take 40 years.
In what kind of a volume?
In all of Fukushima, what they're going to be expelling into the ocean, there is 3 grams of tritium. And that will take 40 years to be disseminated into the ocean through a pipe that puts it out 1 kilometer into the sea. Not a what?
Not a bay.
It's not a bay.
Oh, okay. So
We would just like to know how much tritium is in the water and whether you will consider that as a means of using another way to dispose of the wastewater.
It will absolutely be a consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, in the red? Red? Oh, he's been here a couple times before. All right.
I'll just say that a lot of other people that I have seen speak tonight have been here before. I just happen to live in Amesbury, Massachusetts.
I know you do.
And this is just as much an issue in Amesbury, Massachusetts, for me, as it is for all of you, and that's why I'm down here. So, you want...
No, go ahead. If he's deferring, let's keep it to 2 minutes so we can get a couple of new faces in.
Well, I mean, you were holding other people to 3 minutes and they went 5, so if why can't I speak for 3?
Different than you said before when you stood up.
Let him talk now.
I'm here.
It's 3 minutes, that's fair, Madam Booth.
If you think that I haven't been saying, anything new the other times that I've spoken, then I'm not sure that you've been listening to me because I've been presenting new information each time. I'm here because of the Minamata. And I think that a lot of you may not know who the Minamata are, but you're doing a good job at preventing being Minamata. The Minamata at the second half of the 20th century were fishing people off the coast of Japan who discovered that all of the birth defects and birth abnormalities were due to mercury poisoning that a large corporation was responsible for and knew that they were doing and knew that there would be deleterious effects, and they did it anyway. And that's why we're here. Tritium has a half-life of 12 and a half years. Tritium is dangerous for between 120 and 240 years. Tritium bioaccumulates in contradiction to some flyers that were distributed here at the last NDCAP meeting where they said that it doesn't radionuclides bioaccumulate, and we all know that because we know that the apex predators that you eat, like tuna, accumulate mercury. It's exactly the same process. Strontium that ends up in a fish, if you cook that fish and eat it, you end up with the strontium. And that goes on for that period of time that it has a toxic life. So that is why we're here. And the huge problem that we face is that we have a National Academies of Science that determined 17 years ago, finally, that there's no safe level below which radiation is, it's not dangerous. But we have a Nuclear Regulatory Commission that refuses to take that understanding, that science, into account. So they're providing cover for a giant corporation to allow a giant corporation to dump radioactive water, they're saying in a low enough concentration that somehow that's not dangerous, when in fact, for hundreds and thousands of years after that dumping, these radionuclides are going to bioaccumulate up the food chain, where they will then become most dangerous to our childbearing age women and young children, because those parts of our population have the fastest dividing cells. That's what this is about. That's why I'm here. That's why you're here. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't mean to speak out of turn.
That's all right.
But
I
when
know we
see
get emotional
injustice,
sometimes.
It always bothers me. Fear is fear. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For the record, my name is Jay Gustafaro. I'm a former city councilor in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and I beg that you don't hold that against me. I'm also a longtime lobster fisherman. I've done that my whole life. And trust me, I'm old. So let's cut to the chase here, folks, okay? Once upon a time, the governor of Massachusetts filed suit against the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to try and hold up the Seabrook nuclear power plant. So there is some legal precedent in the Commonwealth of Mass. And I would say, where the hell is Governor Healy? She was around when she was campaigning. We heard from her all the time. Many of us supported her. I know that I did, and I still do. But where the hell is she? Where are you, Governor Healy? Now's the time to use your strength as governor, to use your bully pulpit, your platform. Now is the time. Now on to, and so let's get after her, because she knows better. And election time will come around again. A lot of the bureaucrats and the clerks who are speaking here tonight, they're all going to have their jobs, administration to administration. They can come and talk to you about, the one bogus lab. What a coincidence, one lab. Oh yeah, we should believe that lab. Not where I grew up, guys. No flipping way. No way. Bull. But these guys, they're going to have their jobs, because the clerks, they go on, They can come and they can say, yes, it handles all these elements. Bull! That's bull, and the fix is in, and we know it's in. And for you guys, pardon me?
I take offense to that. That's
Good,
nonsense.
you're welcome to take offense. You should. You should take offense.
I am going to engage.
Very good.
Hey,
I want to
my
go on to
job-
Holtec. I'm not done
You're gonna let me
speaking.
finish?
I have the floor. No, I'm
You
not. I have
just-
the floor.
Okay.
When I finish, you're welcome
Great.
to speak, and I will honor that.
Time?
Thank
You're
you.
right. You're right.
On to the gentleman from Holtec, okay? They're going to take 1 million gallons of highly radioactive water, and they're going to dump it in the Flippin' Bay. No, but wait, they're not going to do that. They're going to mix it in some seawater first, I think in 1,800-gallon increments, to dilute it, so it won't be so radioactive. Well, if it was as good enough to drink to begin with, why the hell are you going to mix it with seawater? And I put that to you gentlemen. And to Madam Vice Chair Holtec, you look like a nice,
John,
you look
could you
like a
gather
nice
your
lady. You look like a nice lady. I bet you recycle, Why the hell do you want to be using recycled materials that have radioactive elements in them? Because they're doing that because it's cheaper.
Sir, I'm
That's
glad
how
you're not on the
America
city
rolls
council
now.
anymore. That's all I gotta
They're
say.
doing it because it's cheaper.
All right, sir, all right. Clarification for what you said earlier. Seabrook, the Seabrook power plant was put in, and you said the governor of Massachusetts sued the Commonwealth or the state of New Hampshire?
State of New Hampshire.
Okay, all right, you said the Commonwealth. All right.
The Commonwealth sued the state of New Hampshire. Thank you
Correct.
for clarifying that.
Okay, that's why I just want a clarification on that, and I'm going to give Mr. Priest a minute to rebut.
So I'll probably have people tomorrow saying, why are you engaging with this person? I'm engaging with this person because I care about what my job is. I take my job very seriously. I'm representing the Department of Public Health. And I listen to the comments that we get. I'm trying to provide useful information and explain why we're using a lab, why it's that particular lab, because everybody wants to know what those results are. And it's my responsibility to make sure that we communicate accurate, valid results so that information can be used as we're working through all the issues associated with a permit. We have the best data so we can defend why we don't think it's in the best interest to put water in the bay. And I have to be able to go back and say that those results are valid and true. And I wouldn't expect anyone from the public to think anything less of that.
May I respond quickly?
No, may I respond? I'm Mary Lampert, and I have been working on the public side for over 30 years.
I recognize that.
And I have full faith and trust in Jack Priest.
All right, we got time for two more. Let's go with Diane, and
Can
then
I
the...
just respond very quickly, politely?
It's not going to be...
No, I don't want to go back and forth.
Okay.
I want to give you guys a historical example from Department of Public Health. My wife was a scientist at DPH many, many years ago when we were young, before we had children, longer ago than I want to admit to. And so I'll tell you, I'm a longtime anti-nuclear activist. And we were first dating, and I went to see her there. And, she gave me a tour of the place, and I went down one of the stairwells, and there were a bunch of barrels of radioactive waste from the 40s. And I said, Jesus, in the 40s, they really didn't know so much. Madame Curie was one of the founders of radiation. She died from it. I said, you should get somebody down here to check that shit, because it could very well be really hazardous. You people are walking. This is DPH. There were 3 labs in the world. One of them was Mass Biologics, Department of Public Health. One was in Germany, one was in Paris. I'll go really quick.
You're not going quick.
The next day, they shut the facility down. The black 18-wheelers came, took all that material out of there. Do I have faith in the Department of Public Health?
That was decades ago.
No.
Ma'am.
Thank you all.
Good evening. My name is Joanne Wilson Keenan, and I live in East Dennis, Massachusetts. And when I talk about this issue, I always hold up my left hand and I say, we live right here in the elbow. And when the radioactive water comes down from Plymouth, it's going to land right on our beaches. During the past 2 years, Holtec and the Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, announced plans to dump radioactive water into their respective oceans. And citizens from both Japan and the United States have voiced their oppositions. I'm just going to talk briefly about 2 subjects of the debate that have played out in both Massachusetts and in Japan. The first is the claims that the water is safe, and the second is the downplaying of the dangers of multiple radionuclides. First, the claim that the water is safe. At Ed Markey's meeting in May, Senator Markey's meeting, a lot of people already know this quote. Krishna Singh, the president of Holtec, stated that his company would not dump contaminated water into the bay, which it wouldn't be after it was treated. The Japanese embassy in New Zealand has maintained that there is no danger to human health from nuclear waste. The deputy head of the Japanese embassy has said that, quote, treated water is not contaminated because that is water from which most radioactive material has been removed. But there's trouble in the water. Despite the claims about uncontaminated water, TEPCO admitted that about 70% of the water that they treated by the ALPS liquid processing system contains radioactive radionuclides other than tritium that exceed legally required standards and require filtration again. Possible radionuclides include strontium-90, cesium-137, iodine-129, and cobalt-60. And then very briefly, they were also looking at the tanks that contain different concentrations of different radionuclides, and they're saying that they have to actually get into those individual tanks to get a clear picture of what these radionuclides are. And then finally, they have to look across the tanks, top, middle, bottom, because the sludge sinks down, and you can have a different reading at the bottom. The downplaying of the multiple radionuclides. In Japan, tritium has been at the center of the debate about radionuclides. And this is a flaw, like a shiny object, that distracts from the potential hazards of other contaminants. In Plymouth, tritium was the focus of the September NDCAP meeting. Other radionuclides have not been given much discussion time. In Japan, TEPCO did not release data until the mid-2018. This was 7 years after the Fukushima disaster. And at that time, they provided details of the presence of more dangerous isotopes, ruthenium-106, cobalt-60, strontium-90 in their tanks. And I'm not going to do all the details because I know we're running late. But there's a couple of things. Plymouth Board of Health has raised concerns a year ago on March 9th that these same compounds have been found in the water and soil at Pilgrim. Dr. James Conca, who was here in September, has said that plutonium, strontium-90, and cesium concentrate up the food chain, and that's Holtec's own invited scientists. And Ken Buesler from Woods Hole has concerns that that the model that would be used to see how tritium dissipates in the water cannot be used for these other radionuclides because they dissipate differently. Okay, so let me just cut to my final point. Last July, the country of Japan appointed a 5-member expert panel from 4 people from the United States and 1 from Australia. They spent a month studying the problem in Japan. And at the end, they did a report, and they came away and said that they raised questions about the knowledge, information, technical skill, and accuracy that TEPCO had to proceed with the dumping. As a result, they said, and I quote, "We would argue that there is insufficient information to assess potential impacts on the environmental and human health aspects of this problem, and issuing a permit," that's their word from Japan, "at this time would be premature at best. Having studied the scientific and ecological aspects of the matter, we have concluded that the decision to release the contaminated water should be indefinitely postponed." End quote. In February, Japan decided to postpone the release of treated nuclear water into the Pacific. The Japanese Prime Minister indicated that the nation would hold off on the release until it was verifiably safe to do so
and based on a relationship of trust and friendship. The question I leave us with tonight is, what is the next paragraph in this comparison between halting the dumping of nuclear waste in Japan and the future of Cape Cod Bay?
Thank you.
Can you just tell my
All right, Diane, you're last.
copies of
Okay.
people?
Yeah, Joanne has a few copies for you guys. Yeah, Diane Turca with us, Save Our Bay and Cape Town Winters. Just a few questions to David. At Senator Markey's hearing, CEO Chris Singh said, quote, "We will not discharge any water in the Cape Cod Bay unless we have major stakeholder concurrence. We will not do that." Would you say Senator Markey is a major stakeholder?
I think he was defined as the major stakeholder at that hearing.
Okay, would you say Senator Warren is a major stakeholder?
I don't know. I assume so.
Would you say Representative Keating is a major
we gonna go
stakeholder?
through the whole
No,
list
just, I
of
have two
every
more, just
elected
two more, and then we'll be done.
They are all major stakeholders.
Okay,
so-
all right, so our governor, Maura Healey, after she was elected, said this, quote, "We know we have to stand strong in the face of Holtec, and I will hold them to their agreements, which do not allow for dumping." That's from Governor Healey. You cannot dump, period. Major stakeholders are saying no dumping. When are you going to remove dumping from your plan?
That's, Diane.
That's a
there's-
question.
You're not getting an answer. Okay, continue.
No, okay, so then let me ask this question, John. Please just let it be a yes or no question, and then we can go home. Okay?
To myself or to
Okay,
Mr.
all right,
Noyes?
One, to Mr. Noyes, just a yes or no.
You know
You've
that there are certain
applied-
questions.
You've applied, you will be applying for the EPA permit, and we were told by the EPA that it could take up to 12 months or more to issue a new or modified permit for you. Question number one, what is your plan of date to take down that spent fuel pool building?
Current plan has reactor building demolition from 2025 through 2027.
Okay. And what will you do if it would take more than 12 months for a NIPD's permit to be issued?
It may have an impact on the decommissioning schedule, which would have an impact on dismantling that building.
And that's understandable. So will Holtec abide by that timeline? That's the yes or no.
We will not discharge without a permit.
Okay, okay. And according to Governor Healey, it's not allowed in the state of Massachusetts, so we're expecting our state officials to uphold those laws. Thank you.
All right, moving on. All right, moving on to the next agenda item, which is review of the 2022 annual report. I don't know who wants to weigh in on this. She's going up to the podium.
Is this the last thing on the agenda?
You get my trust, buddy.
Huh?
You get my trust.
What's that?
I'm a fucking moron.
Yeah, why don't you give it like a minute or two and, yeah. This is candy, no. It's like the guy in the red sweater. Yeah, we can like waste you up 50 years ago. Hi.
I did not, because
Oh, no, I just want to see some of the new.
bad, maybe you just got bad service. I don't know if one thing has I don't know how one thing has anything to do with the other. Yeah.
Mary, all right, let's do it. Okay, we're back. Mary Gatzlick, here we go.
All right, hey guys, how you doing? Pine Dubois sent out a copy of the annual report for review, and I'd like to go over it today. I did get some comments and feedback from some individuals. Moss will wait a little bit longer, John.
Excuse me? All right,
right.
Mary, good job.
Thank you. I was using my mom voice. Dave knows it very well. Okay, so hopefully you guys had a chance to review what Pine sent out. It is a combination of Mr. Lampert's report, my report, and Pine's comments included. So we could go through and get any other discussions. I know that Jim had a bunch of questions, but I'll be happy to answer them and go through it.
Actually, comments.
So, floor's open, guys.
Do you have a list of Jim's questions? And that's
No,
if you want Jim to fire those off to you.
Oh, Jim can fire them off.
No, basically,
Jim, I'm sorry, I'm kind of hard of hearing. Will you just kind of face me so I can kind of look?
Get a mic so everybody can hear me. You and I obviously have some disagreements as to some aspects of this report. As you know, and I think everyone in the panel knows, the report that I said I would write and did and submitted it, as John asked at the last meeting, at least 3 or 4 weeks before this one, and it was actually submitted a month, had a lot of information reporting the public views and concerns.
I'm sorry, Jim, you can have the microphone at your face, not your waist.
You're gonna have to sit down.
Okay, we'll go back and try this one. The major difference between the report that I have submitted to this panel and the one that Pine and Mary Gathlick submitted have to do with what information should be given to the governor and what information should not. At the last meeting, John suggested that we sit down as a group, and I assume the group would probably be me, Mary, Pine, and perhaps my wife. And as I emailed Mary the day before or 2 days before I received Pine's report, my goal is to come up with something that everybody can live with. It won't be everything everyone wants, but it should be something that everyone can live with. My suggestion is, and I think John intimated it, that should happen. And I suggest that basically most of the changes, the edits that were made, other than the deletions, are going to be very easy to work out if there are any problems.
Well, the one question I had, and the one issue that I did have, was you copy and pasted all that information on the spent fuel canisters. That was completely discussed during 2021's report. I'm certainly going to be able to put a link into that section of the dry cask storage to refer to all that information. You yourself said that the report, who reads the report? That's your direct quote. Who reads the report? So the information that you gave me, we took and we massaged it. We didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think this report is pretty succinct.
If you are,
I'm sorry.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry. We report on what happened during the 2022 NDCAP meeting. A lot of the material that you put in was extracurricular, basically. It didn't need to go in there. We said the same thing in fewer sentences.
Actually, I think that probably points up that we may have a second disagreement about this port. The statute says that we have to submit a port annually. Nowhere in this, it also says that we are supposed to advise the governor, the general court, particularly one particular committee, and the public about the issues involved in Pilgrim's decommissioning. It nowhere says that those issues are limited to anything that particularly happened in 2022. I would hope that reasonable people could sit down and accommodate. I know there is a lot of information in that report that frankly would not be positive from Holtec's point of view. The goal of the report for me is to report both sides in a way that the public can read them. And if they read anything, if you go to the website, it's probably the annual reports, because you can't expect them to flog through every single meeting that we've had. A situation in a report that listed both public's concerns and something that's not there now, which would be Holtec's response to those, I think would serve that purpose. But I think it requires you, Pine, me, and perhaps my wife to sit down and work through, can we come up with something that nobody is overly, completely happy with, but that we can all live with and provides the public the information to which I think it's entitled.
Well, we can pulse the committee and find out if they have the same, guys, speak up. It's just not Mr. Lambert, myself talking. I need your input and your feedback also as to what you think about this report as presented and sent out by Pine.
You need two reports, because two reports
No,
were
there's only
sent
one
out.
report. The only report
That's inaccurate.
recognized
That's
Pixie.
inaccurate.
That's inaccurate.
That's inaccurate.
In my opinion, as vice chair, Jim doesn't get to rewrite the whole report, given that Jim was appointed in October.
I was asked by this panel to write a report.
You were not asked.
Wrong.
You were not asked, Jim. That is your opinion. You're very liberal with your opinion. I understand that. But you were not asked or assigned to write or rewrite the report. The report was basically done. She did a great job. You didn't like the way that you didn't like the way it was done, so you rewrote it and you added in all your stuff, your personal impressions and your personal things that you're attached to, and that's not the annual report. The annual reports that have been provided so far have been a reflection of what the work of the panel has been over the course of that year. And we decided as the panel, which you weren't on at the time, that it would be from January to December. It wouldn't be a rehash. The introduction has a rehash, it's an introduction. But you don't have to, but you're not gonna rehash it through the entire thing and state your opinions about everything throughout the whole thing. That's not what it's about. It's not about Jim's opinion.
Fine,
And it can't go that way.
Fine.
No, it is not about my opinions.
Excuse me, just a moment. In terms of why did I write a report, I promised that I would. I was asked by the chair to have one done within a month before. I think to say that I was not asked to write a report by this panel is not exactly correct.
Well,
And frankly, I don't think that's really the issue. I think the fundamental issue here is what should we tell the governor and the public?
Excuse me.
So, all right, go ahead, Mary, and then,
No, that's
who was that, Mary?
Henrietta.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Both of you have worked all of you have worked very hard on this, and I do appreciate that. Everybody does appreciate that. My recollection is that because Jim and several others of us actually had read the report and felt it needed some work, that Jim kindly offered to work with you. And my recollection is that his offer was gratefully accepted. In any case, that's neither here nor there at this point. There are two reports. I read them. I read them all the drafts. And frankly, I found the draft, the second draft that Jim sent on the, I believe it was the 18th of March, to be very balanced, accurately reflected the issues, which I think are, it's very important for us to understand that the annual report is not just a litany of facts or a litany of what happened when, but rather of the major issues and concerns that have concerned the panel, and it seems to me that his report did that. So when I read the second, the final report that Pine sent, I found it was missing things that had been deleted, which I felt were very important. I think I've already said that, so I don't want to say more.
Okay,
We had a question right down there.
Mike.
So, obviously, I'm new to the panel. However, I've come to every single NDCAP meeting that we've had, basically sitting in the audience, but not part of the panel. In all respect to Jim, I know Jim has put a lot of work into his version that he's created. And being retired, I've had enough time to be able to sit down and extensively go through his version, as well as the version that Pine and Mary put together. And I've also, in my working career, done tons of these types of reports. And I think based on the audience that I see is going to review this, and that includes the public, it includes the governor, the legislature, whoever, I just feel that the version that Mary and Pine put together more than adequately meets the requirements of putting together an annual report. That's my opinion.
So, okay. So, some of the criticism that we've had, right, from our legislators is that we're dysfunctional. So, I think we can figure out a way that we can work collaboratively here. And as somebody said previously, we get a document that maybe everybody's not 100% on board with where we're at, but we include some consideration for what Jim provided and some consideration for what Mary provided, and put a document together that communicates to the governor, the public, and the general court, what business did the NDCAP accomplish in 2022? And I think that could also include some of the things that Jim included to re-highlight some of the pressing issues that we're hearing. We heard 15 people provide that feedback to us today. And I think not all the time that gets captured in the minutes as business of the NDCAP, but it's certainly on the minds of the citizens that's trying to communicate to the board. So how do we get to that? So we've got two versions, two markups. How do we King Solomon this and put together a comprehensive document that reflects the general vision of the panel?
Well, at this point in time, if you're going to go King Solomon, you would have to table this issue, certainly. There has to be a vote on some sort of finished document no later than May 22nd. I left the last meeting in January, made a commitment to Mary and Pine that we would get together, and the intent was, and we did, but the intent was to tweak Mary's work and then get it out to the committee. Because one of the critiques in January was the fact that I think within 24 to 72 hours of the meeting that whatever Mary's work was, it had been put on the committee and nobody had a chance to look at it. So I know that we did that. Mary did all the heavy lifting, and certainly it was 3 to 5 weeks out before this meeting, and then I think that's when Jim did his work and came back with his version. But
so do you think
if you're gonna table this, Jack, I mean, I have no.
I'm not tabling it. So what I'm suggesting, so I've got a suggestion. So
Okay.
this is how we got the first few reports out. We pretty much locked ourselves in a conference room because it got so complicated trying to go through what electronic version you had, I had, somebody else had. You know, do we take a Saturday afternoon and go down to Jones River in the conference room table there with a few of us and try to put the document together? I'm willing to help and do that again.
Well, that's what I was going to suggest. I would
suggest that we build off the document Pine sent out. We can take that and incorporate some of the Lambert's comments in it and anybody else's comments.
I would say that we take both documents, lay them out on the table, and put together a comprehensive document.
We
and
need
not
to
just-
build off of one document, Jack, or we're going to end up with multiple copies of different versions.
I'm
Dave.
not ready to concede that yet. So,
I'm more.
one second. So Pine, would you,
I wouldn't have it then. I would have it. I don't know.
we don't need to do it at the town hall. We just need a place where we can work constructively together. Could we use your facility like on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon? And bring some people together to work on this and get it put out?
Not necessarily you, but you could be there if you wanted to.
Oh, but I'd have to turn my building over.
No, I'm asking, so I'm trying to get some members of the group at one place to sit down at a table with one another in cooperation and collaboratively put a document together.
this to bed.
I think we have all of so the hard part is gathering information, right?
Yep.
And getting it down on paper. And that part's done. It's organizing a document. And I'd like to do it someplace that's conducive to us working together as a team. That's what I'm asking.
Yep, Dave, go ahead.
Dave, sorry.
Do we know that we do not have a document that is acceptable to a majority of the members? And don't we owe it to ourselves to find that out?
Well,
If you're suggesting a vote, it would be out of order because it's not on the agenda. If
I'm sorry, Pine, it is
a vote is
not.
not on the agenda.
What's not on the agenda?
The agenda says review report. That is precisely what was on last 2 months ago agenda. The one thing that seems to be fairly clear is that the agenda really has to tell you what you're going to do. Are you going to review? We are reviewing. Are you going to vote? You didn't vote when you said review last time, and I would suggest that looking at comments, et cetera, on the open meeting law, the law itself is clear that you have to be very specific on what you're planning to discuss. And there are comments that make very clear that one of the things that has to be specifically stated is whether you're going to have a vote.
You're hysterical, you know that, about bringing up the open meeting law and sending out all those emails and getting everybody all ginned up for all kinds of, stuff. You're hysterical, Jim. I just want to put that on the record.
I do want to say that if the agenda included, as it should have, a vote, then I think panel members would have, all panel members would have read both and have been prepared for a vote. And so all of a sudden to be asked to vote for something, I would guarantee there are members of the panel who frankly had not given serious attention to both of the additions.
Then they have every right to abstain. I mean, I don't know why we wouldn't at least take a straw vote and save everybody a whole lot of time if we know that we already have a majority that understands what version of the report we ought to endorse.
You wouldn't be going for the editing, so I don't know what time you'd be wasting.
So there's, if we're not, so per the open meeting law and the agenda, if we want to have an official vote to approve a copy, it needs to be on the agenda. If we want to have a straw vote so we can figure out which document we prefer as a preference to work from a base vote, we can do that.
That's what I'm thinking Dave meant, is which version to start with. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we need to start with a version to build off of.
Okay, all right, let's give Dave Nichols a chance to weigh in here.
Yeah, I would just kind of agree with what Jack just said, right? I don't see any reason why we can't take a straw vote to figure out where we start. I like the idea of sitting in a conference room and trying to work out, what the nuances of the report are. I just worry that if you have more than a couple people, you run into open meeting law problems with that too. So maybe you have to just do it in this sort of bigger forum where at least public can attend.
So Dave, I think we can work in conference as we did in subcommittees and not violate the open meeting law.
Okay.
Because we're not working through a deliberative process. We're working through a document that we're going to bring back to the rest of the panel.
Okay, I just don't want to spend time down the road arguing that we didn't do it right because of that. So if we can do it, great. You're right. And there were working group models, and maybe that suffices.
So,
Does that
motion
go-
on the floor to do a straw poll to select Jim or Mary's version of the draft to start as our,
Do you need a majority to do that,
a majority of,
panel members?
we don't have a majority?
I don't think so.
We have a majority in present.
You have 2 online, 15? 13 here, I didn't count Jonathan. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot Mary. That's 16, I think.
Okay, so I have a motion on the floor for somebody to second or not.
I'll second it.
What's the motion?
Motion on the floor is to vote which document we would use as a base document to create our annual report.
May I ask for a roll call vote, please?
Jack, I think you gotta pick one and not say which document, though. I think you gotta say like.
You have to go one and then the other.
Did you make a motion just to conduct?
just made a motion
Just to
to-
conduct the vote?
I want to conduct a
Yeah, we got a
vote. I want to
second.
conduct a straw vote.
Okay, so is there any discussion on Jack's motion, conduct a straw vote? Okay, all those in
Yeah,
favor of just
John,
a-
I don't understand what we're voting on. Sorry. I think I'd like to
voting on
suggest
conducting a
Jack
straw
bring up
vote?
Let me amend
which
my,
version, but like it's not a which version is not a
fine,
yes
let
or
me
no.
amend my motion. I have a motion on the floor to approve Mary
There you go.
Gatzlick's first version as our base.
No, I'd like this Pines version.
What's
version
the
that went
date
out.
of that version?
The date of that version was Monday. Was it?
319.
319.
320 is when it was sent out.
All right, to be used as a baseline.
Date on
That's
the
correct.
document is 319.
I'll second that.
All right, any other question as to what the vote is?
I request a roll call.
Okay, roll call vote. All right, so we'll go to, so there's no more discussion, we're going to call the vote on the motion, it's going to be a roll call. So is Mr. Vivero still here?
Yes.
I am.
John is, what are you voting, up and down?
Yes.
John Viveros is a yes. Dave Nichols?
Yes.
Mary Gatzlick?
Yes.
Bob? Kelly?
Yes. Who was the last one in?
Bob abstained.
Yeah, I got that, and then there was one more, I didn't get in.
Kelly? We skipped Jonathan, I don't think he'll be voting at the next meeting. Henrietta?
No.
Seth?
Abstain.
Jack?
Yes.
Mary?
No.
Andrew?
I'm going to abstain. I wasn't here for 75% of the year in question. I'm not in a position to judge which is accurate or not.
All right, myself, yes. Pine?
Yes.
James?
No.
Mike?
Even though I wasn't here, I'm voting yes.
Okay. John Moylan?
Yes.
And Mr. Noyes?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so that, all right, so we're gonna,
Build off this one.
yeah.
Got it.
We're gonna keep it. God willing, we will find a location.
Second motion.
John, what was the vote, please?
I have a motion.
What was the vote, please?
I haven't counted it up yet.
she
I have
said-
to go back.
The vice chair is counting that up now.
Sorry.
Second motion from Jack Priest.
I'd like, so how do I do this? I ask for volunteers to help come together on an afternoon and draft. Can I ask for volunteers and not have to do that as a
Yeah,
motion?
you don't need a motion. I'm in, I think Mary's in,
Jim's in, I'm in, and the other.
Jackson, so we're at
Depends
5.
on the time, I mean, depends on what the date.
But we'll keep this in, under double digits. We're gonna keep this in single digits, and,
You've got a volunteer over there.
I could do it.
all right, Mike, thank you.
So where can we do
At
it?
11.
Got a town hall room we can use?
Oh, no, that's right.
We'll get out of this meeting and we'll come up, we'll come up with a location. Okay, all right.
10. John Rivera.
And then our goal is to have a document to vote on.
On the
next-
agenda
for the
on
next
May
meeting.
22nd, it will be vote on the 2022 annual report. Vote will be held.
And when will it be sent out? No, I was just, so there'd be ample time for.
Well, sir, we want to do this as soon as possible, Mary. We can't continue to belabor this, so as soon as possible.
I just have one thing to say is I have a commitment for the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
So after that, I'll be back and available.
All right. All right, Mary, thank you. Did you get a final vote on that?
So, we had 10 yes, 3 abstentions, and 3 noes.
Jim Lampert, 10-3-3.
And there were 16 total voting.
Yeah, it looks like 14 people in the room, the 2 out in Zoom world, and it was a 10-3-3. Okay? Do I have
A date, is that what you're asking?
No, we'll work on a date later on. We'll contact people. Is there a motion to
Who
adjourn?
are we contacting? We're not going to deal with the group, so.
I
just
say
put
we
it at the
ta, I
next
say we
meeting.
table that for the next meeting. Okay, motion, is a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Second, all those in favor? Aye. Thank you.